Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Innovative Tac-Tips with myself as the host, Christine Conrad. And I'm excited because this month is Women's History Month, and I'm excited to showcase trailblazers that have made a huge impact in the tech industry. And I'm with the VP of Sales and Partner Programs from Mitel globally, April Miller. Thank you, April, for joining me. Appreciate having you.
Great to be here.
I would love to know, what do you do?
So I work at Mitel. My role is related to, how we structure programs and the rewards and incentives that we do for partners. If I back up a little bit higher, can say, I work in the channel. I've always worked on the vendor side. I've worked in lots of channel facing roles, but always kind of on the go-to-market side. Although I will have to admit that I have worked in operations, and I kind of like that actually. So I feel like in all of the ways that vendors and partners need to relate to each other and what their touch points are, those are things that I'm interested in and that I work on.
Cool. So I guess I like, so I like to get things done, right? Like I'm an activator, I guess, a strength finder 2.0. I noticed that I can't sit on my hands. So operations, I love that. I like to see how everything, a well-oiled machine per se, like how everything works. So I feel you with that. So with you being in those kind of different areas, right? What is the most memorable moment of your career so far?
I think people who work in big companies and maybe in small companies too, but especially in big companies, I think it's probably pretty generally accepted that you're most secure in your role or your best positioned when you have advocates around you. You hate to kind of just come out and say, sometimes you need somebody to have your back, but it's kind of true that you do frequently need to have somebody have your back.
Yeah.
And there's something that I can kind of reflect on now, which is there's a little bit of an inflection point in your career when you go from not only needing to have advocates, but to being an advocate for other people. And so I'm in a place now where I can pretty regularly notice that leadership will come and ask me for feedback on other members of the team. Or on candidates, for example, or people will come and ask me for advice about, even people, maybe I'm mentoring somebody, but maybe I'm not. Maybe it's just somebody that I've worked with and they'll come and say, hey, can you help me, better understand how to develop this part of the pitch, for example. So I think that's a milestone. I don't really know when I crossed over that milestone to where I felt like always I was relying on others as opposed to being that person that people rely on. But I think that at least where I am today, that feels like a really good thing to me.
So with that being said, I'm advocating for people, promoting people on calls, on emails, all that stuff. I think it's super important. With that, I guess, what's one way in your career that you changed someone's life you didn't really expect?
It's probably hard to answer that question without getting personal about somebody, but I would say I'm a pretty introverted person. I'm kind of that person that's probably quiet in the meeting a lot. But that doesn't mean I feel like I don't have a lot to contribute. And sometimes, sometimes if you're in a room with a lot of loud voices, it's hard to make yourself heard. And I try to watch for people who are like me in that way. Because either A, they don't have anything to contribute and they ought not be involved, or B, they have a lot to contribute, but the way that they interact is different and not necessarily always valued in corporate environments, especially. So I can think of a few places where I've had the opportunity to sort of call somebody out and say, hey, what's your thoughts here? Right? Sometimes it's just that simple, to acknowledge somebody who has a different way of engaging.
I appreciate that because in meetings, when you're in a meeting full of 20 plus people, sometimes you're like, Is it my turn to speak? Is it not my turn to speak? When should I add value? When should I not add value? Yeah, and then sometimes it almost feels like you're like fighting for like airtime, right? You're like, okay, when they're done talking, can I jump in? It's so I appreciate leaders who see that, who are aware of that, because that's important when it comes to, you know, I guess the next round of leaders, or like the people that are like growing their career, right? I think a lot of the time people tend to be on the timid side because, one, they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to look like they made a mistake. And so for you to see the opportunity for someone to add value, I think is big in terms of leadership, especially in tech. I think that that's a big thing. So,
Yeah, and even there's a couple of, sort of different nuances to it, right? Like sometimes
mhm,
I think somebody may think they're a little too green, they haven't earned the right, and
mhm,
I'm not, I tend to do that myself a little bit too much to defer. And so, I try to pick that out.
mhm,
Otherwise, sometimes really good input just gets overlooked. And that's a shame. That's just too
mhm.
bad.
Yes. So this sounds, I like to ask this question, um, because I think it's a unique question. What about the industry makes your heart sing about it?
I have worked in tech my whole career, which when I tell that to people, especially like people who know where I come from small town, grew up on a farm
Mhm,
kind of thing,
mhm,
it's kind of a surprise, even a surprise to me. And I think there's two things about it. The first one is the whole aspect of teamwork. Like there's just really no succeeding on your own. I mean, I can't remember the last time I worked on something where I didn't need four different departments involved, right? And so having those relationships, working as a team, your own ideas are never as good as the collaboration. So I think that's the first part of it. And the second part of it is just loving having a challenge. Um,
mhm,
there's every single day, there is something new that comes up, and sometimes we roll our eyes and say, who could even have thought this up, that we would have to solve this?
mhm,
But it's certainly never boring, right? And it's fast, and there's a lot of energy around it, and there's always
mhm.
something to solve.
I sometimes feel like a superhero sometimes because I'm like, it seems like rocket science when you're looking at it and you're like, how can I figure this out? And then you're like, I did it. I was like, oh, I mean, there was probably R&D involved. There's probably product involved, but like it like all came together, right? But you're like, huh, I felt like a superhero there. Yeah, it's very rewarding, and again, like fast paced. It keeps you on your toes. Some days you're like, huh, how did that? Okay, fine. Let's like take it apart, put it back together. So I can totally understand that viewpoint, or I guess just answer in general, because if you love what you do, you never feel like it's a like you're working, right? And if you work with the right people, it doesn't even feel like work. So what's what's a failure, or how has failure or parent failure set up you for success later in life? Do you have a favorite of yours?
Hmm. I watched some of your other podcasts, so I knew you were going to ask me this. So I spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I decided that I would use my example to be being laid off.
Mhm,
Having been down that road more than once, on the one hand, like there's no matter why the layoff happened, right? Like legit,
mhm,
sometimes just have to restructure. It still feels
mhm,
like a failure. It still feels like a rejection. Like there is no way to not walk through all of that emotion, but at the same
mhm,
time, in the scenarios where I've gone through it, number one, I either couldn't or wouldn't make the decision myself to walk away, which it is 100% true that you can stay too long at a company. And secondly, I you can't even really imagine what you're going to do next, right? When you look back and you think, I might not have ever picked this path, but this new company, this, maybe you moved in a whole different direction. Maybe you changed something really significant about how you work during the day, all of those things. Like
mhm,
that's where growth is, right? And
mhm,
so you have to get by the rejection, and you have to get by the fear and all the panic attacks that you go through, and all of that difficulty. But there's there's green grass, and so that's a good thing. And the other thing is
Mhm.
like, particular for somebody like me who's kind of introverted, like I got no desire to talk to a stranger ever. When you go and get a new job, you have no choice, and it's super
Mhm.
good for your network, right? And when
Mhm.
colleagues, move on to other roles and stuff too, your network expands so much so fast that it works out to be kind of one of the best things that could ever happen to you.
I agree with that. I think there's times when I was let go, I it hurt the ego. It was a huge ego bruise. But I wouldn't have, like, the next company that I went to, I wouldn't have met so many wonderful people and partners. Like Marilyn Struck, she's she's wonderful. Like I would have never met her. And again, it's just like it's a blessing in disguise. But again, when you're going through it, you're like, this does not feel like a blessing. Like, can we move on? Can we keep it pushing? Like, can we fast
Yeah.
forward, please? So yeah, I think it brings you success with that growth, right? Like how you feel it, how you apply it. I think that that really benefits you in the long run. So, I guess what are bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise?
I think one of the things that I experience a lot is a lot of maybe the right word is undue pressure to move something in a certain direction, like whether it's a project or to achieve a target or something
Mhm,
like that as an example. Sometimes there's
mhm,
a lot of pressure just to push through, like you can
mhm,
overcome obstacles and eliminate resistance just by brute force. And
mhm,
maybe you can sometimes, but
mhm,
I think sometimes it's better to have a little different perspective and to be a little more creative about what
mhm,
solutions are. And sometimes the outcome that you get is not the outcome that you were told to get, for example, but it still
mhm.
has a lot of benefit to the group or to the company or to the partnership. And so
Yeah.
I'm always a little resistant to somebody who says there's one way and this is the way, because sometimes there's not one way, or
Mhm.
sometimes there's a way, but
Yeah,
that's not it, for example.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Totally. I think when people are like, "Well, this is the way we used to do it," it's like, or we've always done it. I'm like, well, let's take a step back and let's talk about there's other options to think outside the box on that. And again, I think that there's different ways to make things more efficient. And you're right, like you hit the you hit the nail. Yeah, anyways. And now little sayings sometimes I get off. So hit the head on the nail. Yes, that's it. Okay, that's what I was thinking. I was like, did I say that right? Anyways, words today. Um what I guess a couple questions left. What if you had a huge billboard that reached billions of people, what would you put on
I would say there is nothing we can't solve together. Like, because I feel like
it?
that pulls on this whole idea that team is better than no team, right?
Mhm.
The way that you get to the end game or the outcome is by collaborating
Mhm.
and keeping an open mind, right? About, different perspectives, thinking
Mhm.
things through, being open and working
Mhm.
together.
100%. I think when you said open, when you come into a meeting, a team meeting, or just a negotiation, like a really, you can feel it, like you can feel the conflict, right? Like when you go into a contract negotiation, I think if like you go in it with more of an open mind, I think there's like a higher chance for resolution. And to your point, it's like, yeah, it's about keep being open minded and having the I guess the expectation of you want to get to a resolution. You want to get to a, that problem or whatever, like the next steps to be solved, to be ready for the next thing. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I suppose that's sort of what's at the heart of innovation, right? If you really think about it, if you've
Mhm.
worked in technology for a long time, I mean, I think what's at the heart of innovation is not being convinced of what the answer is, because
Mhm.
you don't learn as much, or you don't sort of cover as much ground as if you are open to the possibility that it could work out different than what somebody may have thought.
Totally. So, is there like a book or books that have like greatly influenced your life that you could offer? Just because I'm a bookworm, and I think like I have so much more to read. Like today, I heard a couple books um, that I've never heard of before when I was talking to another senior leader in tech, and I'm like, oh man, I gotta like add more to my like reading list. So, is there any books that you have changed your life?
Yeah, no, there can never be enough time, right? To learn all
Hmm.
of the things. And that kind of
Yeah.
ties into like the one that I'll pick is, let me just say, I talked a lot about people and relationships.
Hmm.
We have our skills and we know how to do our jobs, and we project
Hmm.
manage, and we project problem solve and all of that. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, I think it's really important to kind of know yourself and to value the impact that you have on other people and on what other people bring. So I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. So I'll just mention this one book of hers called The Gifts of Imperfection, which had a huge impact on me when I read it. And my kind of backstory is, I was a good student when I was in high school and college, and like I was always super comfortable being the one who knew the answer, right? And when I'm
Hmm.
working from a place where I'm an expert, I'm super good, right? But there is a kind of important thing that happened in my brain
Hmm.
when I realized that I needed to break up with being a knower. Because turns out, as much as you think you are never going to know enough about everything. There's going to be stuff that you aren't going to know the answers to. And there's going to be projects that you're going to work on where you're going to need to just ask the questions and learn to solve. And so, kind of getting comfortable with the idea that it's not even just okay, but really, really important to be a learner and to always be a learner. Like you don't get to a point where you're done learning anything.
Hmm.
Like to
Hmm.
me, that kind of solved this whole gap that I have about how am I going to move to the next level, because maybe I'm
Hmm.
not going to know enough. But you know what? Maybe
Hmm.
you don't have to. Maybe you just have to be thoughtful about how you listen and about how you solve.
I love Brene Brown. And to those who don't know who Brene Brown is, she has a Netflix special that I mean, I love the book that you mentioned. Um, I just love her work, and she has a Netflix special. I think if people need to know more about her work, because yeah, you need to understand who you are, like why you're having fear, why you're having
Yeah.
more about you, right? Once you know more about yourself, you know more about how to handle things, you know how to like listen, right? Once you know yourself, you understand you better listening skills, all of the above. And yeah, I vulnerability is huge in leadership. I think reading her work is super enlightening because you understand, okay, how do you be vulnerable? How do you be vulnerable in a business meeting, right? Like anyways, so oh yeah, I like Brene Brown a lot. So where can people find more about you?
I mean, probably the best place is LinkedIn. So, we're all always on, right? And that's how you found me, right? So we're all always
Yeah,
on. And I'd say that
yeah,
would be the place to start.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, April, for your time, and see you soon.